This is one of those cases that stays with you. At first, it can seem like a tragic disappearance story, a terrible chain of events, bad luck, harsh weather, and a devastating outcome. But the deeper you go into the records, witness statements, and contradictions, the more a different feeling sets in. Something about this is wrong. This is the disappearance of 5 men in February of 1978, a case that would later become known as the Yuba County Five. What happened that night led from a basketball game in Chico to a remote mountain road above Oroville, and from there into snow, cold, and death. And even now, the central question remains unanswered. Why were they up there in the first place? The setting. The events span several areas in California, mainly Yuba City, Chico, and the mountains north of Oroville. To understand why this case remains so difficult, you have to understand the 5 men involved. All 5 had some degree of intellectual disability or mental illness, though not to the same extent. Later retellings often exaggerated this. They knew each other through Gateway Projects, an organization that served disabled individuals, and they were close friends. In their community, they were often simply referred to as the boys, lived in and around Yuba City, including Marysville, Linda, and Olivehurst, and spent a lot of time together. They liked basketball, bowling, and sporting events. Their routines were usually predictable. They tended to follow familiar habits and schedules. That is exactly why their disappearance was so alarming. The 5 men. Jack Hewitt, 24. Jack was extremely shy and withdrawn. He spoke very little, and when he did, he had a noticeable speech impediment. He could not read or write. He disliked being away from home and almost never stayed anywhere overnight. He was considered gentle and more of a follower than a leader. According to his father, Jack was the most severely impaired of the 5. His closest friend was Ted Weiher, and the two were said to be nearly inseparable. Jack disliked telephones and had difficulty concentrating long enough to use one properly. Ted Weiher, 32. Ted was slower to learn, but he was outgoing, friendly, and loved talking to people. He could read, write, and do basic math. He was mostly non-violent, though he did have a quick temper. Ted was afraid of the dark and was not likely to go out alone at night. When he and Jack were together, Ted often made decisions for both of them. He could become confused easily and had a poor sense of direction. At the same time, he could sometimes think through a problem and make a decision when needed. Jack Madruga, 30. Jack Madruga was described as shy and somewhat reserved. His parents said he was not mentally handicapped, but that he was slow in his thought processes. He was peaceful, capable of working, and held a job as a dishwasher. He also contributed financially at home. He served for about 2 years in the Army as a truck driver and was honorably discharged in 1968. He lived with his mother, handled his own money, and helped pay rent. Madruga was the only one in the group with a car, a 1969 Mercury Montego, and he did not let anyone else drive it. He was also afraid of the dark. Bill Sterling, 29. Bill had been hyperactive since childhood. If frustrated, he could become impulsive and potentially dangerous to himself or others. At the same time, he was social and generally got along with people. His best friend was Jack Madruga. He was considered basically non-violent but would defend himself if necessary. He graduated high school and could hold a job. His parents felt he could be taken advantage of fairly easily. Depending on the situation, he could act as either a leader or a follower. Bill's mother said that Bill and Madruga were strong walkers and could cover a lot of ground quickly. Gary Mathias, 25. Gary is, in many ways, the most complicated figure in this case. He served in the U.S. Army between 72 and 73 and was medically discharged after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. There were also indications of drug use. After the Army, he attempted school, struggled, and eventually ran away to Oregon to his grandmother's home. He later returned in rough condition after a long journey made partly on foot and partly by hitchhiking. Along the way, he reportedly survived at times by stealing milk and even eating dog food. More than anything, that tells you one thing: Gary could endure extreme hardship. He later became friends with Madruga, Sterling, Hewitt, and Weiher. In the period leading up to the disappearance, he seemed much more stable. He was back home, reportedly content, taking his medication regularly, and was described by his doctors as a model patient. Gary could drive, was not easily frightened, and could defend himself. At the same time, he was considered more unpredictable than the others, and within the group, the one most likely to suggest doing something different. The group dynamic. These descriptions are broad, but they reveal something important. The men were relatively functional in everyday life, but under stress, their ability to cope could deteriorate quickly. They were close, their habits were well known, and it was highly unusual for them not to come home, especially all five at once. February 24, 1978. On the evening of February 24, 1978, the five men planned to attend a basketball game at California State University, Chico, about 46 miles north of Yuba City. Jack Madruga drove. He picked up each of his friends in his blue and white Mercury Montego. Bill Sterling's mother last saw him around 6 o'clock p.m. while he was getting gas. After that, the group gathered the others, and sometime between 6:30 and 6:45 p.m., they left Yuba City and drove north on Highway 99 to Chico. This was not an unusual trip for them. What matters is that they also had a basketball tournament of their own the next morning through the Special Olympics at Sierra College. They were excited about it, prepared for it, and expected to return home that night. They arrived in Chico and were seen at the game, which began at 8 o'clock p.m. Witnesses noticed nothing unusual. One witness described them as quiet and content. The game ended at around 9:50 p.m. At about 10 o'clock p.m., the group stopped at Bears Market at 8th and Pine. The clerk, Mary Davis, later told police the men came in near closing time and bought an unusual amount of junk food. She said they seemed happy, excited, and unconcerned. Then they left the store. From that point onward, they should have been heading back to Yuba City. They never made it home. Joseph Shones and the Mountain Road. Around the same general time frame, a man named Joseph Shones was in Berry Creek, roughly 25 miles east of Chico. Early that evening, Shones left his vacation trailer, went to the Brush Creek Bar, and had at least one beer. He then went to the Mountain House Bar and drank more there. Sometime between 5:30 and 6 o'clock p.m., he left again and drove north on the Oroville-Quincy Highway toward the mountains. Why was he going up there? According to Shones, he wanted to check where the snow line was because his family was visiting that weekend, and he thought they might want to play in the snow. He also said he was simply trying to kill some time. People at the mountain house later said they thought it was strange to see him head that way, especially because he knew the area and knew cars could easily get stuck in the snow up there. Somewhere around 6 o'clock to 6:30 p.m., about 8 miles up the highway, Shones found the snow and got his Volkswagen Beetle stuck in it. He later said he spent roughly half an hour trying to free the vehicle. Then he developed severe chest pain and believed he was having a heart attack. He became very sick, sweating heavily, vomiting, and repeatedly getting in and out of the vehicle while trying to warm himself. Hours later, sometime between 11 o'clock p.m. and midnight, he said he was awakened by a whistling sound, which he described as someone calling a dog, and by light shining into his vehicle. The Volkswagen's windows were fogged up, and he said he could not clearly make out the people outside. He rolled down a front window and shouted that he was sick and needed help. According to his account, the figures then moved back down the road. He honked and yelled after them, but got no response. Then, according to Shones, he climbed up a snowbank beside the road to get a better look. From there, he said he could see two vehicles: a light-colored car, later understood to be the Mercury Montego, and a rust-colored pickup truck parked behind it at an angle. He claimed he could make out people moving around the vehicles, and he got the impression that one figure might have been a woman holding a baby. He shouted for help again, no response. Then, he said, the pickup started, everyone got into it, and it drove away. Shones returned to his Volkswagen. Around midnight, his car ran out of gas. The next morning, February 25th. In the early morning hours, Shones became too cold to remain in the vehicle. He decided to walk back to the Mountain House Bar, about 7 miles. By his account, he started walking around 4 o'clock a.m. Not long after, he came upon the vehicle he had initially thought was a sedan. In reality, the Mercury Montego belonging to the 5 men. He opened the driver's door. The dome light came on. The interior was cluttered with belongings. Later, Shones said something about the way the inside looked made him think of a child. He then continued toward the mountain house, moving in short stretches and stopping frequently to rest. He arrived around 10 o'clock a.m. Several witnesses saw him stumble in, sit down, and say, "I should have done this 2 years ago." Multiple people later confirmed hearing that statement. He asked for aspirin and water, then he asked if someone could drive him home. A man named Steve Robinson and Robinson's girlfriend, Laura Lynn Smith, agreed to take him, and this is where things become especially important. Because Robinson later said that Shones told a different story during that drive than the one he would later give police and the media. According to Robinson, Shones said a car had followed him so closely on the mountain road that he could neither stop nor turn around. When he tried to drive up a hill, he got stuck. He blamed the other vehicle for the situation, and for the physical stress he was experiencing. No red pickup was mentioned. He also did not mention a heart attack during that conversation. Back in Yuba City, at the same time, the families of the 5 men were panicking. Many had been awake all night waiting for them to come home. No one knew what to do. The parents started calling one another and confirmed that none of the men had returned. This was completely out of character. Nothing like this had happened before. Also on the morning of February 25th, around 10 o'clock a.m., a Forest Service employee named Bill Neal drove up the Oroville-Quincy Highway to go cross-country skiing. He came across a Mercury Montego parked in the middle of the road. This part matters. Neal said the car did not appear to be truly stuck. It was sitting in roughly 5 to 6 inches of snow. There were tire marks suggesting the wheels had spun, but in his opinion, the vehicle could have been moved without much trouble. He also noticed that one of the side windows was rolled down. Neal shoveled snow so he could get past the car, drove a short distance farther, and found Shones's Volkswagen stuck in the snow. Later that day, Shones's wife and daughter arrived with another man to try to recover the Volkswagen. They were not able to fully get it going at first because it was out of gas and the battery was dead. But they did move it, eventually positioning it around 20 to 30 feet in front of the Montego. Shones' wife described the area around the car as messy with vomit and feces, saying Joseph had made quite a scene around the vehicle. That evening, Joseph Shones was admitted to a hospital in Oroville and treated for a mild heart attack. At around 8:00 p.m., Jack Madruga's mother officially reported the 5 men missing. By then, they had also missed their own Special Olympics basketball event. February 28th, the official police discovery. On February 28, 1978, the Montego was officially identified by authorities. A ranger had seen it earlier, but initially thought nothing of it. Inside the car, investigators found candy wrappers, an empty milk carton, several road maps, and programs from the basketball game, including one with scorekeeping notes written on it. The car still had roughly a quarter tank of gas, and it started when police hot-wired it. That only deepened the confusion. The vehicle was not seriously trapped. With 5 men present, it likely could have been moved. A search began in the surrounding area that same day, but a fresh snowstorm rolled in and drastically worsened conditions. The search and the first contradictions. On March 2nd, Shones was interviewed by phone while still in the hospital. He gave a general account of the night, but changed key details. He said the group he saw may have consisted of anywhere from 2 to 12 people. He also suggested that the pickup truck might have been a hallucination. Just a few days later, on March 7th, he was interviewed again, this time in person and at length. Now the pickup truck was back. He described it in more detail, including its position and color. Investigators also noted something about his demeanor. He was talkative when speaking in general terms, but became defensive when questioned on specific details. At one point, he reportedly said something to the effect of, "I get the feeling you guys think I know something about these dudes." That reaction stood out to detectives. Brownsville and the red pickup. On March 3rd, a woman named Rosella Florence Mulder contacted police. She said that on February 26th in Brownsville, She saw a red pickup truck near a store with several men, some of whom she believed appeared mentally disabled. She later thought she identified 4 of the Yuba men. A store employee also claimed to have seen a similar group in an old red pickup. At first glance, these reports seem explosive, especially because of the red truck, but they present serious problems. If the sighting were accurate, it would mean the men abandoned their car in the mountains, reached Brownsville, and then somehow returned to the mountains to die in the snow. That makes very little sense. There is also a major issue in the testimony. One witness believed Jack Hewitt was using a phone. That directly conflicts with what his family said about him, that he disliked telephones and could hardly use one. So this remains an interesting lead, but an unreliable one. June 4, 1978, the break in the case. As the snow receded in June, motorcyclists traveling through the back roads of the Granite Basin came upon a Forest Service camp. There they noticed a trailer with a broken window. A strong odor of decomposition led them to the trailer. Inside was a body, lying in a bed, completely covered with sheets. It was soon confirmed to be Ted Weiher. Condition of the trailer and the body. Investigators found in and around the trailer numerous open C-ration cans, clothing, books, maps, and notebooks, evidence that a candle had been used. But no evidence of a fire. Ted's wallet and personal effects. A wristwatch that, according to the families, did not belong to any of the 5 men. Severe frostbite to Ted's feet, with multiple toes missing, and clear signs of malnourishment. Ted had a beard and mustache, even though he was clean-shaven when he disappeared. That meant he had survived far longer than originally assumed. Investigators also found black tennis shoes in the trailer that did not belong to Ted, but matched Gary Mathias. Other buildings at the site had been broken into. Blankets and C-rations were missing from one structure. Another building contained heating supplies, oil, gasoline, and other useful materials. But much of it appeared not to have been used. Later, blankets and a flashlight, also Forest Service property, were found about half a mile northeast along a roadside. June 6 to 7, the others are found. 2 days after Ted Weiher was found, the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were located along a remote road roughly 6.8 miles from the camp. They were found on opposite sides of the roadway. Decomposition was advanced. The next day, Jack Hewitt's father, who had joined the search, found additional remains of his son about 1.7 miles from the trailer along the road. Hewitt's skull was recovered later, confirming the identification. Gary Mathias was not found. The search was officially suspended on June 19, 1978, pending further developments. Because Madruga, Sterling, and Hewitt were found in an advanced state of decomposition, absolute certainty was difficult. Still, their deaths were attributed to hypothermia, exposure. Ted Weiher's case was more complicated. The pathologist had to revise his original estimate once it became clear that Ted had been clean-shaven when he disappeared. He eventually concluded that Ted may have survived for weeks, possibly even more than 2 months, inside the trailer. His official cause of death was listed as exposure and pulmonary edema/congestion. The distance and the scale of what happened. One of the most common misunderstandings in this case involves distance. The often cited figure of roughly 19.4 miles between the car and the trailer is not entirely wrong, but it is based on an assumption that the men followed a longer route, likely along packed snow left by a snowcat. The shortest possible route from the car to the trailer would have been closer to 10 miles. But many details suggest they may have followed the longer, more navigable path. Either way, one thing remains true. Even the shorter route, at night, in severe cold, in deep snow, and without proper clothing, would have been horrific. The fact that anyone reached the trailer at all is remarkable. Analysis: Gary Mathias. Gary Mathias is often singled out in theories as a possible instigator, or even the cause of the tragedy, largely because of his schizophrenia and earlier violent behavior. But there is a strong argument against his illness playing a central role at the beginning of the incident. He was taking his medication. His doctors described him as stable. Even his physician indicated that severe deterioration would not happen immediately if he missed doses. If Gary's mental illness played a role in this case, it was more likely later during the period of isolation, cold, hunger, and exhaustion. There is strong reason to believe that Gary and Ted were the two men who reached the trailer. Ted's body was found in bed and covered with sheets. Gary's shoes were found inside. Ted was in no condition to survive on his own, and someone would have had to care for him for at least some period of time. That points more toward care than cruelty. It also weakens the idea that Gary intentionally led the others to their deaths. And there is another point worth making. If Gary had somehow escaped and remained hidden for years, his history suggests that without medication, he likely would have eventually come into contact with law enforcement again. No confirmed trace of him ever surfaced. The most likely conclusion is that Gary also died in the mountains. Why no fire? A common question is why no one appears to have made a fire in the trailer. At first, it seems bizarre. But the closer you look, the more complicated it becomes. Yes, Gary likely smoked and may have had matches or a lighter. But what exactly did they have to burn? Outside wood would likely have been wet or frozen. It is not clearly established that the trailer had a conventional fireplace or wood stove. The heating system appears to have been based on butane, not necessarily a wood-burning setup. What is genuinely striking is that nearby structures contained heating-related supplies, oil, and other resources that were barely used, if used at all. Why? Possible answers include exhaustion, hypothermia, frostbite, and confusion. People in that condition do not always make rational survival decisions. The red pickup. The red, or rust-colored, pickup appears in multiple strands of this case. First, in Shones' statements. Second, in the Brownsville sighting. Third, in an earlier incident where Ted Weiher was reportedly seen years before with a man driving a faded red pickup. That is fascinating, but also dangerous. Vehicles like that were not rare in rural areas, and at least one of these sightings likely has nothing to do with the others. The key issue is this: the pickup in Shones' story is itself unstable. He mentions it, then suggests it may have been a hallucination, then later describes it very specifically. So instead of being a clean lead, the pickup becomes part of the larger credibility problem. Joseph Shones, the key witness and the key problem. If there is one point in this case where everything converges, it is Joseph Shones. He is the only known witness to the pivotal moment. That makes his credibility enormously important, and the problem is not merely that his story changes. The problem is how it changes, the different versions. To Robinson and Smith, he describes being pressured by another vehicle and effectively forced into the situation. To his wife, he tells a version involving the pickup. In his first police interview, he downplays or questions the pickup. In a later interview, he brings the pickup back and describes it in detail. On top of that, there are additional inconsistencies in what he told reporters and investigators. Why was he really up there? What exactly did he see? How many people were present? Was he hallucinating or not? At times he sounds uncertain. At other times, he sounds unusually specific. Possibly the most important statement in the entire case. The words Shones reportedly said at the Mountain House: "I should have done this 2 years ago." Several witnesses heard it. No one knew what he meant. In the context of the story he later told police, it barely makes sense. If all he did was get stuck in the snow and suffer a heart attack, then what exactly should he have done 2 years ago? That statement troubled investigators, and it still raises questions. Did he know one of the men? Was it connected to some older incident? Was it a meaningless statement made in distress, or an accidental clue? There is no clear answer. A theory that explains some of the contradictions. What follows is speculation, but it is based on known statements and behavior. One possible reconstruction looks like this. After leaving the bars, Shones drives up the mountain road but does not immediately get stuck in the snow. Instead, he may stop somewhere short of the snow line and fall asleep in the car. Later, the 5 men in the Montego come up the road and find it blocked. They try to get his attention with lights and whistling. Shones wakes up, startled, starts his vehicle, and drives farther uphill trying to make room or turn around. but because of snow and the narrow road, he cannot. Then he gets stuck. That would help explain why he later claimed another vehicle pushed him up the road, or followed him so closely he could not turn around. If an argument followed, possibly fueled by anger, possibly by alcohol, that may have been the turning point. The rolled-down driver's window on the Montego is at least consistent with someone speaking to a person outside the car. Whether it ended in a verbal confrontation or actual threats cannot be proven, but it could explain why a group of men who disliked darkness and cold suddenly went uphill into the snow instead of back towards safety. This theory does not answer why they were in that area to begin with, but it may explain why they abandoned the car and went into the mountains. What investigators seem to have believed, authorities also appear to have suspected, for a long time, that Shones knew more than he admitted. The problem was simple. There was no hard evidence against him. The case remained open. And because Gary Mathias was never found, it remained formally incomplete as well. There are indications the case was revisited years later. Even decades afterward, Gary was still at times considered a possible victim of foul play. That tells you something important. The possibility of outside involvement was never truly ruled out. Other theories, and why most don't hold. Over the years, many other theories have emerged. A targeted crime against disabled men, local suspects from rumor and hearsay, old grudges, even paranormal explanations. Some of the surrounding history makes those theories emotionally understandable, including prior attacks connected to gateway projects and stories from the area. But solid evidence is thin, and that is why serious analysis almost always comes back to the same points. The unexplained route toward Oroville, the decision to go into the mountains at all, the roadside encounter between Shones's Volkswagen and the Montego, and the contradictions in Shones' accounts. The core mystery. Even after all of this, the biggest question still remains. Why were these 5 men, at that hour, so far off their route in the mountains? They had an important tournament the next morning. They disliked snow and cold. Madruga would not let anyone else drive, and according to his mother, he would not have picked up hitchhikers or aimlessly driven into that area. Was it a mistake? Possible, but hard to believe. Was it intentional? A lot points that way. Were they lured, pressured, threatened? Also possible. It may even be both. An unexplained decision to leave their normal route, followed by an escalating encounter with Shones. Final thoughts. What happened afterward is tragic, but not supernatural. 5 men in light clothing, in darkness, snow, and extreme cold, under stress and possibly in panic. That alone is enough to produce catastrophe. And yet something still feels unresolved, the sense that the trigger for all of it was not simply bad luck. Joseph Shones took much of what he knew, or refused to say, with him when he died in 2004. With him may have gone the only real chance at a clear answer. That is why the Yuba County Five remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases of its kind, not because there are no explanations, but because there are too many possible ones, and none of them cleanly account for every piece. And that is often the hardest part of an unsolved case, not what we know, but what we almost understand, and still cannot prove.